Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. Japanese bonds rebound and US stock futures edge higher as investors dip their toes in the market after the trade and tariffs-driven sell-off. Davos stands by. President Trump's finally on his way to the World Economic Forum after Air Force One was forced to turn back due to an electrical problem. We'll bring you interviews with key players in Davos, including the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, the US Trade Representative Jameson Greer, and top business leaders. But the picture in markets this Wednesday morning looks like this. We have futures pointing higher stateside. Uninspired is the picture here in Europe. But if you look at the long end of the Japanese bond curve, yields are dropping this morning, so reversing yesterday's moves. Remember, yesterday's moves sent the stock picture into a tailspin, as well as President Trump's tariff threats over Greenland. But all of that reversing, it seems, today. Now, the risk events on the docket include that speech from President Trump himself at Davos. Our analysts say that he's more likely to ease than escalate tensions when it comes to Greenland. We're also waiting for the Supreme Court to consider the Lisa Cook case. Fed governor, of course, and Trump wanting to oust her. Can he? Over the unproven mortgage allegations. Could be months before we get a decision there, but interesting to start hearing the arguments. Then at 7 a.m. London time, we'll get the latest UK inflation reading. A blip, a temporary bounce in inflation expected, but it's only going to be temporary, says the Bank of England. Plenty on the docket today. Let's set you up for the day ahead. Plenty of attention today on one man's address at Davos. That is President Trump. His words will be followed closely by European leaders and markets alike after the recent ramping up of rhetoric over Greenland. Before his departure, President Trump said he was confident of finding a solution and doubted that his use of tariffs to strong-arm allies would spoil the trade deal with the EU.
I doubt it. Look, they need that agreement very badly with us. They really do. They fought very hard to get it. So I doubt that. But we'll see what happens. We have a lot of meetings scheduled on Greenland.
Without collective governance, cooperation gives way to relentless competition. Competition from the United States of America through trade agreements that undermine our export interests, demand maximum concessions, and openly aim to weaken and subordinate Europe, combined with an endless accumulation of new tariffs that are fundamentally unacceptable, even more so when they are used as leverage against territorial sovereignty.
So the president's now en route to Davos again after a slight delay. Air Force One had been forced to return to Joint Base Andrews after a minor electrical fault. Let's go to Jemana Besetji. She's on the ground for us in Davos. Jemana, we heard from some of the world leaders there. Mark Carney had said that the world's rules-based order is dead. Macron accused Trump of colonialism. How bleak is the mood where you are?
Yeah, well, it's one of anticipation. And today is the big day. President Trump is en route here with a bit of a delay. It seems he's supposed to be giving that widely anticipated speech at 2:30 p.m. local time. We'll see if it gets pushed back because of the Air Force One rerouting. But ultimately, the day is here, and we know that there's going to be a lot of focus around what he's going to say, and specifically whether he's going to take the feud that's ongoing right now between the U.S. and European allies over Greenland to another level, or whether his tone is going to be de-escalatory. But ultimately, you could say that they're letting the fox into the hen house. And quite literally, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said yesterday, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu, that the current rules-based regime, the order is over. We are entering into a new world order in which different types of collaboration are going to have to take place. And you've seen it with the various responses out of leaders within Europe and around the world to the latest pronouncements from the U.S. vis-a-vis Greenland. You have the likes of President Macron coming out swinging, urging the Europeans to come up with a cohesive and perhaps more forceful response. And then you have others like the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, urging restraint, looking to restore that dialogue again. Yesterday, our colleagues in surveillance had a conversation with the Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb, and he said that he hopes by the end of the week that some of the tone will be de-escalated. So there is a lot of anticipation today. It could go anyway, but typically we know, I think from the playbook, the Trump administration playbook, is that Trump tends to push things to an extreme in order to extract a better deal. And so we'll see what that type of negotiation actually looks like in the context of Greenland. But most certainly, there's going to be a lot of focus on what happens there today.
So I'm sure traders will be hanging on to every word. What signals should investors be listening for in that speech in terms of what's happening next when it comes to Greenland and tariffs, Jemana?
And it's interesting you bring up the market reaction, Lizzie, because, again, one thing we learned over the past year is perhaps the only thing that tends to restrain President Trump is the markets. The markets are a stabilizing factor. And you saw that after Liberation Day, with the tone significantly being dialed back in the coming weeks after we saw that plunge in markets. Yesterday was the first day you actually saw a significant market impact because people started talking about the potential for the Sell America trade, the Danish pension fund saying that they're going to be selling U.S. treasuries. Whether that's going to have a long-term impact, again, is a big question. But then you have the likes of Sergio Ermotti, UBS CEO. Our colleague spoke to him yesterday saying it would be... It would fully backfire if institutional clients started doing that. So let's see whether by the end of the week some stability is restored to these markets, Lizzie.
OK, Jemana, thank you so much for all your coverage so far. We'll come back to you shortly. That's Bloomberg's Jemana Lesetja in Davos. Well, ahead of President Trump taking the stage at Davos, we're going to bring you an interview with the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. That coming at 8:30 a.m. UK time, live from Bloomberg House. But turning back to the markets, Japan's long bonds rebounding this morning as the country's finance minister called for investors to calm down. Speaking to us in Davos, Tatsuki Katayama defended the government's fiscal policies as responsible and sustainable. Let's get more now with Winnie Xu in Hong Kong. Winnie, just walk us through the market reaction here.
Yeah, morning, Lizzie. That's exactly what you mentioned. We are seeing that rebound in Japanese bonds across the curve after that speech from Finance Minister Tatsuki Katayama. And here specifically for the longer end, 40-year yields actually up some 17 basis point here. And at one point, even dipping through that 4% that was hit yesterday. Now, similar trends that we saw across the curve as well. However, that ripple effect is actually affecting the stocks market as well. As you flip the board and take a look at some of these financial names that we are seeing on the Japanese stock market, specifically Mitsubishi UFJ, Sumitomo Mitsui financials, all down some 3% or so. And that is coming after how investors are voicing some concerns when it comes to how these banks are able to manage their risks with bonds fluctuating so much. And that capital investment might slow down with funding costs potentially increasing further. And now you also flip the board and take a look at how the broader Asia market is doing today. As you mentioned, tracking some of these losses overnight from the U.S. With the MSCI here down about 0.7%. But I'd like to also just highlight that these losses are slightly less compared to what we saw in the S&P 500. And that's also partly because of that weakening trend in the dollar, helping our region as well. For the Kospi, still holding up quite well even after that strong rally so far this year. And in terms of the Chinese dollar, weakening just a bit after the PBOC had a weaker fixing to slow down the appreciation of the currency. Back to you, Lizzie.
Winnie, great stuff. That's Winnie Xu in Hong Kong. And as she says, elsewhere, the market volatility seen yesterday in global bond and stock markets is showing some signs of easing today. Sentiment appears to be improving stateside, with US futures pointing higher. Let's bring in Mark Cudmore now, Bloomberg Markets Live executive editor. Mark, how much will that rebound in JGBs comfort the rest of the market after the sell-off we've seen?
Good morning, Lizzie. Minimally is the answer. The bounce, is just emphasising how little liquidity there is. There's not much that trades in some of these long bonds each day. And the fact is, yields are still significantly higher than they were on Friday. I don't have live prices right in front of me, but I believe that 30-year yields are about 25 basis points above where they were trading on Friday still, which is still an extraordinary move, even though we've recovered a chunk today. So the fact is the trend remains very poor for JGBs for the last year or longer, and it's likely to stay that way. The fundamentals are in place. Japan has to cope with the fact that it's either going to have a much weaker yen or a much weaker bond market, or potentially both. It can't kind of preserve them both over the long haul, because its debt profile and demographics and lack of growth just don't justify it. So ultimately, yeah, we've got a little bit of consolidation today, but you pointed to US futures being a little bit higher. They're up 0.3%, 0.4%. After falling more than 2%. They erased the whole year's gains. So this is really just a few day traders punting that we get a little bit of relief today, knowing that they can just place their stops below the overnight low. So it's a risk-reward trade, not because anyone believes it's going to get better. The trend for this week is still extremely negative. The price action is poor, despite what you're seeing on the screens in the immediate session.
OK, green shoots, nothing to write home about, Mark. But we've had JP Morgan's Bob Michael saying that the sell-off yesterday was, and more broadly, a message to President Trump from investors. The president, though, hasn't changed his stance when it comes to Greenland. So are we going to have to be braced for more volatility as we look ahead to this Davos speech today?
I think so. Look, if you're Donald Trump, you're seeing stocks at record highs. You're seeing yields that have stayed relatively contained given what's happened. He wants a weaker dollar. So from his point of view, he hasn't got much of a warning from markets. The general trend of the last year is that there's a little bit of brief noise and kerfuffle, and then everyone gets on with what he wants. So I don't think he's had any real message from markets yet. And I think he will heed a message from markets. But I think that's when we were talking about the stock market, falling 10, 15, 20%. Not just because it fell 2%. That's kind of an irrelevant kind of move. So I don't think he's had much of a message from markets yet. And therefore, I just don't see the incentive for either side to back down. Now, I'm not the geopolitical expert, but I'd love some geopolitical expert tell me why, in the immediate basis, it makes sense for either side to concede ground. I understand ultimately it benefits no one to have a trade war, but no one's given me any reason why anyone should concede in the immediate basis. So I can only expect it's going to get worse this week when we get to Davos. But of course, I'm hoping that there's some better outcome out there.
Well, the good news, Mark, is we've got plenty of Geopol voices coming up on Bloomberg TV. Bloomberg's Mark Cudmore, thank you so much. Still to come on Daybreak Europe, we're going to be speaking to the International Atomic Energy Agency's Director General about his concerns on Iran as President Trump's foreign policy ambitions dominate the discussions at Davos. That conversation coming here at 6:30 a.m. UK time. But first, we'll be speaking to South Africa's Reserve Bank Governor on his country's new lower inflation goal. Our exclusive interview, next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Just coming up to 6:15 a.m. here in London, but let's head right back to Davos, where South Africa's delegations come to the World Economic Forum, buoyed by fresh momentum in the rand. This after the country last month adopted a 3% inflation target in a bid to curb long-term currency depreciation. Let's go to Bloomberg's Lesetja, who's on the ground for us in Davos with our next guest, Jemana.
Lovely. Thank you, Lizzie. I'm really happy to say that joining me right now is the South Africa Reserve Bank Central Bank Governor, Lesetja Kganyago. Really good to be chatting to you again. There's a lot to talk about this week. Obviously, people are very focused on the arrival of President Trump today. But I think more broadly, one of the themes that has propped up is one of uncertainty, just uncertainty about the near-term outlook, both geopolitically and economically. How would you characterize the macro outlook for South Africa now?
Well, first, the uncertainty is global uncertainty is a given, whether it's in terms of the geopolitics, whether it's in terms of trade, and whether it's in terms of the economic posture that is taken. From a central banker's perspective, one finds it difficult to say where the geopolitics would go, where the trade tensions would go, and we end up with a scenario an event where we have got to work with scenarios because we can't quite tell. It's really a difficult time to forecast. In terms of South Africa's macro, we are actually in very good space as it stands, and it's a result of three important factors. Firstly, has been the monetary policy reform that we have done. We have adopted a new and lower inflation target that is in line with peers, that is underpinned by a new monetary policy implementation framework. And secondly, had been that South Africa had been promising fiscal consolidation over the years, and investors' attitude was wait and see. We now can show that over a period of 3 years, that fiscal consolidation is on course, and that we are actually going to have debt to GDP ratio peaking at the end of the current fiscal year and commencing a decline. And thirdly, and more importantly, is laying the basis for growth through structural reform in the energy sector, reform in the transport and logistics sector, reform in the visa regime, and all those three put together are putting South Africa on a very sound economic footing.
What growth are you expecting for South Africa this year?
We are expecting growth of around 1.4 for this year. Still modest, but at the very least, it is double the growth of the previous year. When you go through the kind of reforms that we had to go through, you will expect that growth will be actually pretty modest.
Yeah.
And I think that importantly had been that we had a long period where the growth potential of South Africa has been eroded, and we have rebuilt that. And from here now, we think we've built a basis on which growth
for
will
higher potential
accelerate.
growth. Let's talk about inflation. Obviously, you have the reworked mandate. Back in December, you described South Africa as entering into a low inflation economy. But the latest inflation print was 3.5%. It's expected to show another uptick. Would you still describe it as a low inflation economy?
Oh, yes, without a doubt. What is important is what is the anchor for inflation? We have got a new anchor, which is 3%, and that 3% has got a tolerance band of 1% on either side. We had come from an economy where we had a very wide and high inflation target range, where we had high inflation outcomes. And since 2017, we had been going on a trajectory that is lowering the inflation expectations. And the most recent readings of inflation expectations show that inflation expectations are actually converging towards our new inflation target. Okay. There is a print that is coming out later today. We expect to be a slight uptick to 3.6%. But throughout the year, the prints that we expect for each one of the month is that they will all have a 3% handle.
So what is the outlook for interest rates then?
The outlook for interest rates depend on what the outlook for inflation is. And as far as we are concerned, inflation will continue to have a 3 handle during the course of this year. We think that inflation this year would average anything around 3.5%. And we expect that by 2027, inflation will then converge towards our new 3% target. That then says that we still have room in terms of the monetary policy statement of the November meeting. Our quarterly projection model is actually forecasting 2 further reductions in interest rates. But again, this is just a guide that depends, that changes from meeting to meeting depending on data.
Could that be influenced by what your friends at the Fed do? There are only 2 rate cuts priced into the Fed rate curve this year. And over there, policymakers are sounding a bit more cautious about the path forward for further rate cuts.
Well, people tend to forget that the Fed is the Federal Reserve of the United States of America. So they take decisions based on the U.S. economy. The decisions that they take affect the largest economy. And for us, as a small open economy, yes, we get affected by that. But the manner in which we take decisions, we calibrate policy based on our own economic outlook, based on our own inflation outlook. And of course, our own economic outlook depends on the outlook for the global economy, which is also very much driven by the largest economy being the United States.
I've got to ask you, since we're speaking about the Fed, you are one of the first central bankers to sign that statement of solidarity in support of the Fed Chair Jerome Powell around the discussion of central bank independence. Why was it important for you to send that message out?
Well, I have been there. In South Africa, we had significant challenges to central bank independence in the year around, almost 10 years ago, 2016, 2017. We were fortunate. Our independence is enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. And we had to bring South Africans along with us to rally behind the importance of independent institutions. But importantly is that in the Durban meeting of G20 governors and ministers meeting, there was a ministerial declaration, and that declaration mentioned the importance of central bank independence in promoting price stability at least 3 times. The Johannesburg Summit, Leaders Summit, in December, also re-emphasized the importance of central bank independence. And we felt duty-bound to remind the world that actually the G20 leaders had committed themselves to central bank independence and that it was important that governors actually come out in support of Jerome.
Governor, that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for joining us in Davos today. That was the South Africa Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago. Lizzie, I'll toss it back to you. We have more interviews coming up.
You definitely do, Jemana. Thank you so much. That's Bloomberg's Jemana Besetchi. And we're going to bring you President Trump's Davos speech live here on Bloomberg Television. That scheduled to come at 1:30 p.m. London time. And as Jemana says, we've got plenty of big interviews to bring you from Davos today as well, including with the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, the US Trade Representative Jameson Greer, Commerzbank's CEO Bettina Orlopp, BlackRock Vice Chairman Philip Hildebrand, Morgan Stanley CEO Ted Pick, and the BHP CEO Mike Henry. Not a quiet one, but coming up right here on Daybreak Europe, President Trump's search for a new Fed chair, as Jemana was just discussing, is becoming a hunt for an elusive unicorn candidate. We'll get you the details next. This is Bloomberg. Now to other top stories we're following this morning. The US Trade Representative Jameson Greer says that there may be another round of China trade talks ahead of President Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping in April. Greer suggested that the discussions could move beyond highly sensitive issues and focus on basic goods and services. He spoke after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent held an informal meeting in Davos with the Chinese Premier. Elsewhere, Bloomberg has learned that the US Justice Department has subpoenaed Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and other state officials to investigate whether they impeded federal immigration operations. Meanwhile, President Trump says that ICE agents sometimes make mistakes, even as he broadly defended his migrant crackdown.
They're going to make mistakes sometimes. ICE is going to be too rough with somebody, or, they're dealing with rough people. They're going to make a mistake. Sometimes it can happen. We feel.
And Bloomberg understands that US President Trump is becoming somewhat frustrated by his choices to replace Jerome Powell as Fed chair. Trump's looking for someone who is a loyalist, who commands credibility with Wall Street and his MAGA base, and who has a shot at Senate confirmation. The shortlist now includes the National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett, BlackRock executive Rick Rieder, current Fed Governor Christopher Waller, and former Governor Kevin Warsh. Well, coming up on Daybreak Europe, geopolitical tensions dominate as we enter day 3 of Davos. We're going to be speaking to the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency about his concerns on Iran. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. Japanese bonds rebound and US stock futures edge higher as investors dip their toes in the market after the trade and tariffs-driven sell-off. Meanwhile, Davos stands by. President Trump's finally on his way to the World Economic Forum after Air Force One was forced to turn back due to an electrical problem. We'll bring you interviews with key players out of Davos, including the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, the US Trade Representative Jameson Greer, and top business leaders. If you're just joining us, welcome to Wednesday at 6:30 a.m. here in London. And the market's picture looks like this. The stock sell-off from yesterday set to reverse a touch. US futures pointing higher, a touch uninspired though here in Europe, flat to the downside. So don't get too excited. There's a ways to go to reverse yesterday's losses. But this, as we see long-end Japanese bond yields dropping this morning, so reversing some of yesterday's action that, of course, along with President Trump's tariff threats on Europe over Greenland, had sent stocks into a tailspin. But on the front pages this morning, we have Greenland set to dominate again at Davos and dominating the front pages. The Financial Times has the dollar and US stocks falling after President Trump said that there was no going back on his campaign to take control of Greenland. The FT also reporting that the World Economic Forum's senior executives are considering a location change, perhaps to Detroit or Dublin. Doesn't quite have the ring to it, does it? But let's also flip over to The Guardian. They're focusing on Europe's response to President Trump's threats. The French President Emmanuel Macron in Davos condemning what he described as Trump's new colonialism, criticising what he called the useless aggressivity of pledging tariffs on countries opposed to the US taking over Greenland. And then if we flip over to the Wall Street Journal, they've got the escalating tensions over Greenland risking undermining the world economic order that really had put the US at the heart of the global economy. So the US perhaps no longer a beacon of safety for investors. But you could get a roundup of all those stories and everything you need to know to get your day going on today's edition of Daybreak, which, of course, terminal subscribers can find by going to DAYB Go. Well, all this geopolitical turmoil and trade worries are taking centre stage at Davos as President Trump takes aim at NATO allies over Greenland. It comes amid rising political pressure on Iran in the wake of widespread anti-government protests. So let's head back to Davos now, where Bloomberg's Romana Basetchi is with a guest, Ju.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. So joining me right now is the IEA Director General, Rafael Grossi. Really good to talk to you. And in the introduction, my colleague was just talking about developments in Iran. Obviously, Iran is a focus for IEA inspectors. From what I understand, access to some of the bomb facilities has been restricted since the war last year. But you still have access to some of the undamaged facilities. Let me start off by asking you, when exactly was the last time IAEA inspectors were in Iran, and what did you see?
Well, yes, that is correct, by and large. We have been there. We're still there, in the sense that inspections do continue, but as you rightly say, not to every place, or at least not to every facility that we should be inspecting. We have been conducting a series of inspections at facilities which were not hit at the 12-day war past June, but we haven't had access to Natanz, Isfahan and Fordo, the facilities that were hit at that time. And this is part of the conversations, the discussions, the negotiations we are having with Iran at the moment to try to return to those places, because it's still very important.
Have you made any headway in determining the location and the condition of the highly enriched uranium?
Well, I don't think any headway is needed, really, in terms of determining where it is, because I think there is widespread consensus, and there hasn't been any denial on that the material is, by and large, where it was before the attacks. So the issue here is having access, when to do it and how to do it.
So when President Trump says that their nuclear ambitions have been obliterated, that is a mischaracterization, because they're still sitting on this highly enriched uranium.
I wouldn't qualify it like that. is not a mischaracterization. I think it's true that there has been very considerable, severe damage to the nuclear infrastructure in Iran that is going to be setting back the program considerably. So there are different metrics as to how long that would take. But in any case, it has been very important. But, and here comes the but, the material is still there, as I said, and most of the equipment that was destroyed could be replaced or could be rebuilt. So this means that these capacities, these capabilities are still there. When it comes to enrichment or to centrifuges, we're not talking about something that you cannot rebuild relatively easy. It may take some time, but it can be done. So the issue continues to be what are we going to do medium to long term in terms of providing a framework for a stable situation where it comes to Iran and its nuclear program.
Yeah, what is your level of concern now vis-a-vis the potential for another Iran-Israel war and the potential for the US to get involved? Are you in contact with them? Because last time around, your inspectors got stuck.
Well, I'm constantly in contact with foreign minister and others in Iran. I think that's important. The dialogue continues, however difficult it may be, the dialogue continues. And, I don't know about military decisions taken by nations. What I can say is that it will clearly be helpful if we can clear this situation from the list of potentially dangerous situations that may lead to situations like the ones we lived last year. So clearly, this is an open question, and we need to provide answers to that. The sooner, the better, yeah.
Is it your sense that Iranian authorities want to go down that route? They're open to those negotiations with you, and that they're open to allowing further inspections? I
think so. But there's always the small letter. There are sometimes conditions. There are sometimes expectations that they may have. And don't forget that as a background to what I may be doing with Iran, there have been some bilateral consultations with the United States, which are very important. We encourage that, of course, but that there is a mutual implication on these two processes, which are parallel. They do not touch each other, but there is a reciprocal influence, if I can put it like that.
Yeah. Do you see this as a precarious moment right now in Iran?
It's very fragile, so I think we need to fix it as soon as possible.
Okay, a slight change of tact. You've thrown your hat into the ring to become the next UN Security General. What is it you think that the UN can help solve? Well, I think right now, because it's coming at a time where there has been a loss of faith and loss of trust in multilateral institutions, specifically the UN.
Indeed, particularly is when the going gets rough, that one has to take certain decisions and try to make a contribution. The work we have been doing at the IEA, what we have been discussing about Iran, the Middle East, Syria, other places, what we have been doing in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine in the nuclear facilities has shown me that there is a possibility, that there is a contribution that can be made from a multilateral platform. We see that there is a vacancy there. Peace and security was the reason why the United Nations were created 80 years ago. And now there is an absence. And of course, in the presence of an absence, other ideas come up.
Yeah. What are the most pressing reforms that need to be done there?
I think this is not only about the UN proper. The UN needs to reform. The UN needs to right size. There are many things that can be said. At the same time, we need a new deal between the United Nations, in particular the Secretary General, and the member states about what we need, what we have to have in terms of a credible, really, truly global international institution like the UN.
Sir, thank you so much for your time. Lizzie, I'm going to toss it back to you. That was the IEA Director General, Rafael Grossi.
Okay, Lesetja, we thank you so much with the latest on that fragile situation in Iran. Staying with geopolitics, meanwhile, leaders from around the world have condemned President Trump's threats against Greenland ahead of his arrival in Davos.
The proposed additional tariffs are a mistake, especially between long-standing allies. The European Union and the United States have agreed to a trade deal last July. And in politics, as in business, a deal is a deal. And when friends shake hands, it must mean something.
Canada strongly opposes tariffs over Greenland and calls for focused talks to achieve our shared objectives of security and prosperity in the Arctic.
Europe has very strong tools now, and we have to use them when we are not respected and when the rules of the game are not respected, by the way. The anti-coercion mechanism is a powerful instrument, and we should not hesitate to deploy it in today's tough environment.
All of our focus is on de-escalation, not in worst-case scenarios. The strategic relationship between the US and the UK, the military and strategic partnership between our countries is more important than the partnership between any two countries in the world.
Leaders including the French President Emmanuel Macron and the UK Chancellor Reeves there speaking out against President Trump's moves on Greenland. So what form could the response take? Well, the UBS Group CEO Sergio Ermotti says that Europeans tempted to weaponise their holdings of US government debt are making a dangerous bet that risks backfiring. Speaking to Bloomberg on Tuesday, Ermotti said that diversifying away from the US is impossible because it remains the strongest economy in the world.
Diversifying away from America is impossible. I think that in any major asset allocation, one could probably think about having an overweight or underweight, but diversifying away from the US and also from the dollar is a quite dangerous bet. You know, things can change rapidly, and the US is the strongest economy in the world. The one who has the highest level of innovation. Right now is a little bit bumpy, but I would say that I wouldn't really bet against the US.
There seems to be a difference between how the politicians and the policymakers talk about America right now and the backdrop for international relations and how a business person thinks of America, the economy and the opportunity. I've mentioned this stat a number of times already today about the survey that PwC put out. They surveyed 4,500 CEOs and the top destination for capital for investment, America, and it was up on last year. As a bank boss right now, a CEO who's thinking about expanding around the world, why is US still top of mind for you?
Well, because from our standpoint of view, we see two big levers. First of all, wealth creation, GDP growth, innovations, and also more idiosyncratic to UBS is that we see potential for us to become more present, increase our market share. So that's one place. On the other hand, we are also very big in Asia. I mean, we manage $1 trillion of assets there. We are growing very fast. The economy is growing. Half of the population in the world is living there and is creating new wealth.
UBS Group CEO Sergio Ermotti there speaking to Bloomberg's Jonathan Ferro in Davos. Well, coming up, we'll stay with corporate news. Why Netflix is issuing a cautious forecast for the months ahead, despite fourth quarter results beating estimates. We'll dig into the numbers from the world's biggest streaming giant next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now to some top corporate news this morning. The online brawl between Elon Musk and Ryanair has dragged into a second week, with the world's richest man again floating the idea of buying the Irish airline after clashing with its CEO. The feud erupted when Michael O'Leary said that he wouldn't consider installing SpaceX's Starlink internet across the budget airline's fleet because of fuel costs. Musk then called O'Leary misinformed, who in turn branded the billionaire an idiot. Elsewhere, Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang plans to visit China later this month. This as he works to reopen a crucial market for his company's artificial intelligence chips. Bloomberg understands that he'll be in the country to attend company parties ahead of the Lunar New Year holidays. A source says that he'll visit Beijing, though it's unclear whether he'll be meeting with senior Chinese officials, and his itinerary could yet still change. Meanwhile, Lululemon shares closed 6% lower after it paused US online sales of a new gymwear line, with customers complaining that the leggings are see-through. The Get Low collection was launched just 3 days ago. The company saying that the products are still available in US stores and in other markets. In 2024, Lululemon pulled a line called Breeze Through after customers reported unflattering fits. Well, staying with results, Netflix shares falling in extended trading after the streaming giant issued a cautious outlook for the months ahead. Let's dive into those numbers now with Bloomberg's deals reporter Manuel Baigorri. Manuel, good morning to you. Why are investors so disappointed? I thought the Stranger Things finale was going to be rocketing these results.
And definitely, Lizzie, it's a great point because they beat largely Wall Street estimates. But at the same time, they issued a little bit of a cautious forecast outlook for the rest of the year, mostly, as they describe it, based on potential investments. There's some opportunities to invest in new TV programs, show some films, so they'll take advantage of that during the year. And at the same time, obviously, as we all know, they're busy trying to closing potentially one of the largest ever deals in the industry, so with Warner Bros. So that is also accumulating some cost and also uncertainty. So I think those two are the major issues, perhaps, on why investors took a little bit of a cautious approach and the shares are down. But at the same time, I mean, there is a lot of excitement about the company, about the future prospects. They issued reported strong results for the fourth quarter. And now the main question is how the big potential deal with Warner Bros. Is going to pan out. That is going to be a significant milestone for them if they get it done.
OK, Manuel, thank you so much for that latest. That's Bloomberg's Manuel Baigorri. Well, heading back to Davos, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, is urging people to keep cool heads in a bid to reduce tensions over the US, over President Trump's threat of tariffs ahead of his arrival in Davos today. Let's hear a bit more of what she had to say at Bloomberg House during the World Economic Forum.
All of our focus is on de-escalation, not in worst-case scenarios. We have worked incredibly closely with President Trump the last year because we believe it's in our UK national interest to do so. The strategic relationship between the US and the UK, the military and strategic partnership between our countries is more important than the partnership between any two countries in the world. And it's very important for the safety and security of the Western world that that continues, and we're determined that it will do so. Similarly, the fact that we were able last year to secure the economic partnership deal with the US, and we continue work on the transatlantic markets work that we're doing at the moment to make it easier for our capital markets to be better integrated, and firms listed in the UK and the US raising finance in each other's jurisdictions, greater collaboration when it comes to digital assets. All of that is in the UK's national interest, and we'll continue to pursue our national interest vigorously. But I don't think it's in anyone's interest to escalate tensions or to allow rhetoric to be a substitute for hard work and diplomacy.
But you think the trade deal stands? Because at the moment there's wild speculation about whether everything needs negotiating, whether President Trump goes really hard. I mean, how do you model this?
I would just urge people to keep cool heads.
Cool. Okay.
I mean, that's what we did all through last year, and it actually served us pretty well. And whilst trade barriers are going up around the world at the moment, we can all see that. In the last year, barriers to trade with the UK have fallen. We've secured a comprehensive trade deal with India, which will come into force in the next few months. Just taking legislation through both of our parliaments to secure that. That includes trade in services, support for exports, and also around government procurement. That's a huge deal. The deal with Greer, one of the fastest growing economies as well in the G20, is very important for the UK. But most importantly, probably, is the trade with our nearest neighbours and trading partners in the EU. which was damaged after leaving the EU, voting to leave the EU in 2016. We are now fixing that mess by improving trade relations and cooperation with our closest allies and neighbours.
That was the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, in Davos. We've got plenty more on the show. Don't go anywhere. This is Bloomberg.
Things are a bit chaotic and the markets do feel a bit panicked. The market had a fit in April and then they backed off of a lot of things and then calm ensued. We need to hear some of the same kinds of things.
The JP Morgan Asset Management CIO Bob Michael there. Well, we do have US futures pointing higher this morning, but let's just recap what happened yesterday because there is a lot of ground to recover here. The S&P plummeting more than 2%, its first time since mid-October, because President Trump plunged the markets into this risk-off mood because of his tariff threats in response to those countries opposing his plans over Greenland. Now, the geopolitics sent traders flocking to gold and silver. Flip the board and we can take a look at the precious metals. Silver up 30% so far this year. It's only January. And indeed, gold notching record after record as well, looking at that $5,000 a troy ounce level. Also helped by the meltdown in Japanese debt. So flip the board over, we can take a look at the bond space, because government bonds did not play the usual safe haven role that they would. You can see here, we discussed how European countries hold twice as much US bonds and equities as the rest of the world combined. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying at Davos that Europe dumping treasuries is a false narrative. Well, we had the first salvo of European retaliation, wobbling treasuries overnight, as you can see here. Yields on 10 and 30-year treasuries resetting into new ranges. And ironically, that putting a lot more pressure on mortgage rates than President Trump's relief would help. As I say, these moves somewhat reversing today. Just take a look at the snapshot of markets at the moment. You can see futures are higher stateside. Gold climbing still, but the 10-year Treasury yield here at 4.27%. What could change all this? The risk events on the docket today include UK CPI at 7 a.m. London time, the main event, Trump speaking at Davos, and later on, the Supreme Court hearing Lisa Cook's case as well. We're going to bring you that speech from President Trump in Davos on Bloomberg Television. That's scheduled to begin at 1:30 p.m. London time, but don't miss it. The opening trade's up next. Anna, Guy and Tom will take you all the way to the start of the European cash trade. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Good morning from London.